Andy Warhol was the king of pop art. Warhol confused the issue. He sabotaged modern art through parodies, commercial reprocessing, and divergencies on all fronts. He popularized the images of America in all its commercial aspects. Worse than that, he popularized everything and even made a style of it. It all became pop art. Warhol was above all a runaway, a refugee from war and poverty. You see, his family had immigrated from a Slavic village, and they had settled in Pittsburgh, city of steelworks, or hell on earth. Andy Warhol grasped the century's growing obsession with youthfulness, so he decided early on never to reveal his age. After moving to New York in 1949, Andy showed a talent for drawing. He developed a technique consisting of blotted lines, and his career began, founded on compromise. Within 10 years, he became one of the greatest illustrators of shoes in New York, and he was acknowledged as the Leonardo da Vinci of footwear. He was a product of pure capitalism and of the blast furnaces. He was a machine, reproducing anything he laid his hands on. Andy was a master at manipulation, distorting, turning things upside down, such as silkscreen prints, reproductions, fake posters, and rip-offs. Andy said everything can be art. Warhol went even further and sensed the dawning of an age in which the artist would become the finest part of his work. He was aware that he would have to change continuously, becoming a professional dissident. You see, Warhol possessed an exceptional power of intuition. New York was already in revolt. Artists were fed up with abstraction, and they turned to scavenging, rooting around in trash bins. In 1961, the scene was changing, and photography posed a threat to illustration, and Warhol began to lose commissions. So he decided to advertise alone. Andy produced his first portrayal of the Campbell soup can. This reinterpretation of the still life marked the advent of consumer goods as subject matter for the artist, and an image of society as a whole. The European press saw it as a Marxist criticism of capitalism, but it certainly was not. Blessed with ubiquity, Warhol did not take a stand. He was unaware of any hidden depth. Warhol concentrated on form, and he devoted himself to serial composition. And in search for powerful symbols, he opted for the most powerful symbol of all, the dollar bill. In 1962, like a forager, he took up silk screen printing. Andy appeared in Time magazine in the midst of an article devoted to the pop art movement. With a totally vacant mind and with a vocabulary limited to terrific, fantastic, and wow, he created for himself a role of provocateur without opinions. When receiving potential buyers, he would bore them to death by playing the same record over and over again. You see, repetition was his weapon, as was directness. Entirely lacking in finesse, Warhol went straight to the point. Andy once wrote that buying is much more American than thinking. Andy drew anything famous. The famous faces of American scarlets, brand names of biscuits, and he also took an interest in the news. Because Warhol's intuition was perfect. He sensed that violence, atrocities, and the electric chair were going to become symbols of America, just as Marilyn Monroe, Judy Garland, and hamburgers were. He knew that everyone would soon be discussing the burning issues of a nation, imitated in all its successes and failures by the entire Western world. The reaction was hostile. He was accused of stealing his subject matter and screen printing it. So he moved on to Coca-Cola bottles. The consecration of pop art occurred on December 13, 1962, when a symposium was organized at the Museum of Modern Art. From then on, nothing was to escape the tidal wave. The following year, every museum in the country attempted to put on its own show of pop art. So Warhol plunged into the macabre with, among other works, Suicide, Saturday Disaster, and White Car Wash. In his hypnotic repetition of shock subjects, he exposed and contributed to the establishment of one of the motivating forces of our century: repetition. Repetition breeds familiarity and then boredom. Warhol realized that the mangled remains of cars and human bodies had become elements of the American scene so much. So Warhol embarked on a series of Liz Taylors, Elvises, Elvis with a pistol in his hand, huge guns, Marlon Brando wearing Hell's Angels gear, and of race riots. In mixing celebrities and various phenomenon, Andy became the eulogist of all that global information was soon to become, a hodgepodge of races and blood. In 1963, Andy turned to the film camera. He made numerous films. They were long, aggressive, and homosexual in nature, because Warhol's dream was to become a leader of the avant-garde, even though he denied it. Warhol's films were dreadful, projected on the wall of a room like vulgar moving wallpaper. He thought that any moment in time could become a pure artistic creation. In 1964, Warhol pulled off a coup, exhibiting cardboard boxes at the Stable Gallery. These were wooden replicas of cardboard Brillo boxes. As he piled them up, the controversy exploded. It was a fiasco. However, as a result of his Brillo boxes, which was described as a gesture of aggressive passivity, the art world did change. The world of abstract expressionism declined. Andy proved that he was first and foremost the greatest artistic director of the post-war era. By now, it was late 70s and 80s area. Warhol had transformed himself into the portraitist to the famous, painting the likes of Yves Saint Laurent, Golda Meir, David Hockney, Muhammad Ali, politicians, artists, athletes. They all ended up on his canvas. Warhol slipped from bohemian New York to international jet set. In his self-defense, he wrote that making money is art, and working is art, and good business is the best art. Andy seemed to be noting the death of art. Nevertheless, he did several paintings oxidized with urine and produced negatives of his own work. With this self-consumption, Warhol was by now postmodern rather than modern. He was actually becoming respectable. He had accumulated thousands of objects in locked rooms and drawers fitted with false bottoms, filled with watches and jewelry. He collaborated with Basquiat unsuccessfully and turned to commercial art again. By now, Warhol's signature by itself had become a commodity in its own right. As a result of so many skin treatments and collagen injections, his face no longer had anything natural about it. He was becoming exhausted. So on February 21st, 1987, he was rushed to hospital, dying there later that night alone. He was only 59. Once the shock and grief died down, exaggerated rumors began to circulate, and the artist became a myth. Perhaps Andy Warhol was not really dead, and his body was simply another fake. This explosive artist's final act. In hindsight, it's easier to grasp that the exhilaration of his colors, his cow wallpapers, his flowers, his Marilyns, his mouse, Warhol was inviting us to watch art's grand finale. Post-Warhol, there's a great silence, a darkness, and a universal disenchantment in a certain sense. Andy Warhol was an explosive mixture of cunning and naivete, and even the killer of modern art. Once you thought pop, you could never see America the same way again, he said. Post-Warhol is the world itself, and we will never see anything the same way again. Thank you, Andy Warhol. Art will never be the same after you. Well, like, subscribe, and be a genius. Think for yourself. This has been a Logic channel.